Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how are you? Welcome. Couple things. It's a little hard getting back in the saddle with recording again, but I first want to tell you what you can expect in this episode, and then I'll jump back and tell you a little bit about why it's hard and then where we're heading. I really want to talk today about how it's really okay for us to be kind of all over the place with things and to change our mind. It's okay to choose and to re-choose. And even though the things that I'm talking about may be very specific in content, but process-wise, this is applicable to everything, whether you're thinking about getting a new job or, I suck at coming up with examples. And when I was walking the dog this morning, I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to talk about. I kind of bored myself because it was just too long. I really did want to give you the whole linear process because I'm going to be talking about some things that are going on with me, but I worry that the content is kayaks. And I think about when I got my kayaks over a year ago, my husband had kayak fatigue. And I was talking with a good friend yesterday about I'm sure people are tired of hearing about the kayaks. But for me, the kayak is the content, but the process is relevant to whatever it is. If you're thinking about starting school, going back to school, if you're having relationships that you're struggling with, if you want to take a course, if you're struggling with parenting, if you need to do a repair, if you need to do research on something, that the process is very, very relevant. But, if kayaks bore you, then you probably don't want to listen to this episode. What can I say? The other thing that's been really interesting is I can't remember if I did a lot of notes before when I recorded. I usually just sit down and record, but with COVID, I'm still struggling with I just can't sit down and read a book. I'm sure being on TikTok as much as I am is ruining my ability to focus and concentrate because I get a quick hit of dopamine, every 10 seconds. But my ability to focus and concentrate has really diminished. So I think what I want to do is try and do a brief overview just to bring you up to date on why this is so significant. When the pandemic started, I've always enjoyed paddling, kayaking, and I'd gone a couple times. And probably in June or July of last year, 2020, the first year of the pandemic, I started paddling with a friend's boyfriend on Wednesday. He's got 2 kayaks, and every Wednesday we would go out, and it just saved me. And we had a sit-on kayak, the kind that you just sit on top of. We'd go out for a paddle and we'd come back and we'd have to carry the kayaks from the sand up to the grass and then, take them apart, then put them up on his car. We did this together. I'd come back from a paddle and I'd be exhausted, and having to do this extra stuff just felt like a lot. I did it because I loved the paddling. And one of my sons and his girlfriend at the time were talking about wanting to get me a kayak. And I'm like, I totally appreciate it. I wouldn't go alone. It's so much work getting it from the water to the car, and I'd have to do it by myself, and no thank you. That's how I felt at this time at the beginning of the pandemic. Then around September, I started loving paddling, and I thought I really want to get my own kayak because I was limited to when I could go because of when he was going. So I ended up buying 2 kayaks in September of 2020 and started paddling a couple times a week. I was paddling with him one day a week, and then I'd go by myself. And then around November, with the elections and the political stuff that was happening here in the States, I needed to set a boundary. I just needed a little bit of a break from hearing about what was going on after the elections. Here's my perception. What I would have loved to have heard was, gosh, I hear that you need to set a boundary. I'm happy to respect that. And when this changes for you, let me know and we can kind of resume. But that wasn't what I got. So basically after that, last November, I started paddling on my own, which was lonely, but I did it. Going through winter for the first time paddling was new. I'd get to the water in the morning. It was foggy. I had asked some other paddlers, is it safe to go out? And I was just told to hug the coast. It was cold. I had to get some winter weather. And then I went through periods where it was really hard for me to paddle. And so bless my husband's heart, it wasn't uncommon for him to go with me in the afternoon, or sometimes we'd go to a lake and he would just sit and read while I paddled because I just couldn't get myself there by myself. which is just part of the process. There are times when I paddle a lot and times when I struggle, and thank goodness I have a husband who loves and supports me. And I got back into paddling very regularly. And then last April, the 30th, I was launching my kayak from Liberty Station here in San Diego, which is a ramp for boats and kayaks and stuff. It's very slippery. I slipped. I reflexively put out my wrist. I broke my wrist and needed surgery. In the ER, I said, how long until I can paddle again? And the ER doc said 8 weeks. And I was devastated. Then I needed to have surgery. So I broke it on the 30th. On May 4th, I was in pre-op. And when the surgeon came in to talk to me about the surgery, I'm like, how long until I can paddle again? He's like, October. Y'all, I have to tell you, paddling is what saved me during COVID. It just saved me in the thought of losing the whole summer. And I didn't have enough information then, but I also thought that meant that I'd be casted and I wouldn't be able to go in the water and I wouldn't be able to be at the beach. And I was just crushed. I ended up starting occupational therapy probably in June sometime. And, we were talking about when can I paddle? And at one point, because the OT and I would joke about how I could just get on the water in my kayak. If I launched from the beach, then I could straddle the kayak, drop my bottom in, and then pretty much do the same thing getting out. So I wouldn't be putting any pressure on my wrist. And we joked about, there could be a truck on the land that had a winch and it could loosen me out and then it could pull me back in. We kind of joked about this. And then I got an idea because I really wanted to get on the water. I called the local Lake Murray. I talked to Fred in concessions and said, Fred, I have a really unusual question to ask you. And I explained my situation. I said, is there a way that I could just tether my kayak to the dock so that I could have the experience of being in the water, but I wouldn't have to paddle? And he said, sure. I went back and talked to the OT about that. And by this time, the OT had cleared me to do a little bit of a paddle. I needed to put a brace on when I launched and when I came back in. But I started paddling probably mid-July, which was amazing. For my birthday, we went up to Long Beach to visit the kids. We brought my kayak. I did some paddling. It was just great. And at that point, there was a paddle that I think was 3 miles, and I wasn't sure if I was able to do it. And I did it without a problem at all. At that point, I was paddling about an hour. My head is going, you guys are bored. But if you're here, maybe you're here for the story. I'd go out for an hour, but I'd bring my iced coffee with me. I use an app, Marco Polo. I'd polo people while I was in the water. I loved getting out, but I wasn't paddling for distance. Then probably August, I looked for a paddling group in San Diego, and there was a sea kayak group, which they have the sit-in kayaks. Okay, so here's what you need to understand about the sit-in kayaks. You are not sitting on top of that kayak. The sit-on kayaks are very, very stable. They're not very tippy. Never wore a life jacket when I paddled because the person that taught me to paddle didn't wear one. I had contacted this group months back and was told that they only took people with sit-in kayaks. And I thought, you snobs. And then when I started to get back in paddling again, I reached out again and was told that I could join them. They launch off of a dock, which is very different. What I do is I launch from the beach, which means the boat goes in the water. I, walk into calf length water, knee length. And then like I said, I straddle the boat and drop my bottom down. But they launch off of a dock. And because my wrist was healing, I really wasn't sure how I would do that. So again, bless my husband's heart, he showed up at the dock with me. And we brought my kayak down and somebody showed me how to get in and get out. And so he left and I paddled with them, and everybody's saying you've got to get a sit-in kayak. So the sit-in kayaks, your feet go inside the kayak and then there's the opening and you put on, it's called a spray skirt. So if you can kind of imagine a neoprene tutu, it's very snug. It fits up from like your high ribs down to your belly button, and then it opens up, and around the kayak opening is a lip. And so you secure this neoprene skirt so that when you're in the water, if there are waves, water won't get into your boat. And for the more experienced paddlers, they roll. So a 360-degree roll. So if you can imagine paddling, then you tip yourself over to the right, you do whatever you do underwater so that you come up on the other side and you do a roll. Well, my thought was being upside down in a kayak, trapped in, did not sound like a lot of fun to me. And I'm thinking, y'all keep trying to tell me how great the sit-in kayaks are, but the thought of being upside down in the water scared me. I mean, it just really felt like it was not fun. And I don't think people understood that if I switch to a sit-in kayak, I have to learn how to do that, because if I tip, then I'm going to be in, it's going to be really hard. So everybody kept telling me how great it was, and I'm like, no, thank you. I did ask one of the paddlers if she wanted to start paddling. So on Mondays, we meet and we paddle. I think we did a 7.3 mile paddle, and then I did an 8.1 mile paddle. One week, I think I paddled close to 17 miles. On Saturdays, this group does skills training, rescue training. So you can learn how to fall out of your kayak, get back in your kayak. You can do rolls. As you know, in bonus episode 90, I practiced falling out of my kayak and getting back in. I don't know what happened, but something made me decide that I wanted to try the sit-in kayak. I don't even know what it was. A week ago, my paddling partner, Brenda, and I took out it's called a Tsunami 160, so a 16-foot sit-in kayak, and we did a 5.5 mile paddle. Normally, I'm hustling to keep up with Brenda, so my sit-on kayak is not very streamlined, and it's heavy. It takes a lot of work to paddle it. When I had the Tsunami, she had to hustle to keep up with me. So then I started thinking, okay, maybe I do want to get a sit-in kayak. So I spent Monday researching the Tsunami, looking at all the reviews and figuring out where I could get it, and looked for used ones and did all of this research and got very, very excited. And on Tuesday, I called a local store where they get them. I knew that it would probably have to be delivered from where they're made. And she called the company, and the company is not making Tsunamis this season. And then I went into this funk. So this is kind of where the emotions go all over the place. And starting kayaking, and I don't want my kayak, and now I do want to have a kayak, and I don't want the sit-in kayak. Now I want the sit-in kayak. Like, it's really okay for us as we progress and grow and change to want different things, to change our minds, that there's nothing wrong with that, and to be open to possibilities. But especially this last week, it was hard because I spent all this time researching and deciding that this is what I wanted, and then I couldn't get it. On Wednesday mornings, the same group goes out to the ocean, but then they meet for coffee where they launch from afterwards. And I thought, I'm going to show up on Wednesday morning and just ask some questions and pick their brains to figure out, what do I do now as far as looking at kayaks, and where do I go from here? Which was kind of a big thing for me. Going and having needs and feeling like I'm not paddling with the group, but I want to ask some questions. And it was really nice because somebody suggested there are two other kayaks, the Zephyr and the Tempest. And one of the guys that paddles has one of each of those boats. And he said, meet me here next Wednesday. You can try both of my boats out. And where they launch from, they have those boats. And one of the paddlers there, who's very, very experienced, also has a Zephyr. And we talked, and he gave me some input. And then he said that he would meet me on Friday, and we could take one of the boats out, and he would help me. Because the challenge is, these boats they're more like sports cars, and they're tippier. And where we launch from is not the beach. So there's this kind of risk of, I need a kayak that I'm not going to outgrow, that I can learn how to paddle and roll and do all of these things in, but I don't have the skill set for it now. And I felt really overwhelmed because I want to try these boats out, but I don't want to fall until I learn how to fall. And I kind of got paralyzed. I just didn't really know what to do. And this was before I had the plan to paddle with Pat on Friday. But I just got very paralyzed. One of the things I did do is I reached out to a new paddler in the group that I ended up not paddling that night, but reached out to her and said, hey, do you ever want to get together and paddle? Again, trying to just expand the group of people that I have for paddling, because sometimes this group goes out in the ocean and I've got to navigate my seasickness. So anyways, we have a plan to paddle. On Friday, I went out with Pat. We met where we launched from, and I took out the Zephyr, which is, I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's tippier. It's a sportier kayak. I think that y'all can relate to this. Many of us grew up parentified. Many of us have an overly burdened sense of responsibility. This is not so much about being highly sensitive. There's this overlay of trauma. And the more I'm learning about trauma and complex PTSD, I think those of us that struggle with boundaries and feeling overly emotional and having a hard time with conflict, I think some of that is about trauma and not so much about the trait of being an HSP. And so learning to tease that out and to work on healing that trauma so that we can enjoy the traits of being highly sensitive We're creative, we're conscientious, we have a lot of empathy, we process things very deeply. Being highly sensitive is a neutral trait, but when we struggle with the trait, I think often it's about an overlay of trauma. So I had no idea what we were going to do. And going back to this thing of being overly responsible, and we tend to want to be in control, be in charge, but then we often get really overwhelmed. At least this is my own personal experience. So I had no idea what we were going to do and felt a little bit nervous, but I thought I'm going to give it a shot. So we paddled out and he showed me what to do. I felt pretty comfortable. I loved how he taught. And we went across where we launched from over to this little bay area, and we practiced me going upside down in a kayak. So literally upside down, locked in with a spray skirt, pulling off the spray skirt, releasing one of my knees and getting out of the kayak, and then getting back in the kayak. And we started out on the sand. And then we went to waist deep water where I could stand. And then he had me fall out and not put my feet down and then get back in, and he secured the kayak. And then we went out into the deeper water and he was in his kayak. And so I tipped out of my kayak, and then he had to pull my kayak onto his boat to get the water out of it and instructed me what to do. And then he secured my kayak from his kayak, and then I had to get back in my kayak. And underwater, you have to open your eyes because you've got to see where the release is for your spray skirt. What I have to tell you is, and I meant to record that morning and I just wasn't able to. I was ambivalent. I was feeling really meh. I was feeling very overwhelmed. I was going to go, but I really wasn't feeling super excited about it. And I was kind of nervous because I just didn't understand, like, how am I ever going to learn this stuff and what are we going to do and blah, blah, blah. Y'all, I have to tell you, it was such a relief to be with someone that I trusted, who was calm and did not get impatient with me and allowed me to have my process. When we got back to the dock and I came home and thought about it, I spend so much time on my phone, y'all. I really do, and way too much time in my head. And because I had to put my phone in my dry sack and put it away since we were flipping the kayak, I thought, you know what? I have not been in my head for a few hours. I met him there at 9, and I think we got back to the dock about 12:30. I was so in the present moment, just enjoying what we were doing and was not worrying about things, was not anticipating, was just not in my head, and was absolutely in the present moment. And it was it's like it gave me a break. And to master the skill that, a month or two ago, I thought there's no way I would ever want to be upside down in a kayak. I have a lot of fear about being underwater. I have problems with my ears. I get dizzy. I just have fear about not getting enough air. To be able to do that and to master it was amazing. Now, 2 other things I have to tell you. So today is the day after. I'm incredibly sore because I had to use my muscles to pull myself in, to get out of the boat. I've got bruising. And if you said to me today, Patricia, let's go do that again, I would be like, no, thank you. So for me, I think I'm always going to have to rumble with this resistance. And resistance isn't a bad thing if I'm aware that it's resistance. I also think my body needs a day to rest. That I was talking with a friend, and we normally meet on Saturdays, and then we kind of put a hold on it because I was paddling with this group and we talked last night. And I'm like, I want to paddle tomorrow, but I need to see how my body is. Y'all, I have to tell you, I was just so stiff and sore last night, and I'm sore today. So my body needs a day of rest. But here's what I want to tell you. When I went out on Monday with Brenda, so I talked to you about learning how to launch off the dock. And the first time I did it, I was like, okay, but I don't want to do this again. It's hard. And I kept practicing. And every time I went out, I'd need somebody to make sure that, the kayak didn't go out from under me and I'd lose it. And the last time that I launched in my sit-on kayak from the dock, you can use a little dog leash to secure it to the cleat end of the boat. And I just had somebody watch, and I was actually able to drop into my kayak and get out, just having somebody watch to make sure nothing went wrong. So when Brenda and I went out on Monday in the sit-in kayak, I was able to get in okay. But when I went to get out, you're sitting lower in the water. Now, folks, what I do when I'm nervous is I laugh. I laugh hysterically. And I can't remember if I told you that I went out with this group one night on a Wednesday night paddle, and they were supposed to stay in the bay, but they decided to go out into the ocean. And I went out through the channel to the beginning of the ocean. I thought, no. But the problem is you have to, if you go back to the docks, I couldn't get out of my boat by myself on the docks. And then you need to get out. Somebody has to let you out the door to the docks. So I paddled around and ended up running into someone who launched with the group but decided not to go out. And so we went back to the docks and I went to the lowest place to get out of this one. I had my sit-on kayak. And I just started laughing hysterically. She's like, what? I said, I do this when I'm nervous. So I laughed, he laughed, I got out of my boat. On Monday, when Brenda and I went out, I thought, I've mastered getting out of my boat, so there's not going to be any problem. But this is, you're much lower to the water. And I could not pull myself out of the sit-in kayak. So I laughed hysterically. Brenda laughed hysterically. And fortunately, there is because beginners launch from this ramp, it's where people rent kayaks. I was able to go to kind of the baby pad and then just roll on my belly. So I had let Pat know that I just want to let you know that when I get nervous, I laugh hysterically. So I had anticipated coming back to the docks and laughing again, but he showed me another way to get out of the boat, and I was able to get out of the boat and did not have to go into hysterics over it. It just was really, really exciting. So now I'm just trying to figure out, what is it that I want to be doing with the kayak? Do I want a touring kayak? Do I want a sporty kayak? Pat was saying yesterday that the Zephyr is a very playful kayak. And I'm thinking, I don't think that I'm very playful on the water. I was watching some videos this morning of people doing sea kayaking where it's kind of like you're surfing in your kayak and it looks fun. And I don't know. So I'm in this place where I'm just going to need to try a bunch of different boats. I'm going to need to keep working on my skills and then figure out what type of kayak is it that I want. And with this shortage supply right now, finding somebody who's got a boat that I can get into is also going to be another thing, and then getting all the equipment. What I want to impress to you is, what I thought, like, who would want to be upside down in a kayak? Why would anybody want to do that? And then I did it, and it was incredibly empowering. How can we work with our fears and our resistance and to not push and to know, like, today I need a break and I'm not going to do it? And so how do we find that sweet spot of self-compassion, of having days where we feel overwhelmed and it's too much, and then figuring out when we need to push a little bit? The other thing is that when I was waiting for Pat yesterday, I met this woman, and she and her husband have kayaks. I talked to her about, hey, if you ever want to paddle, I would love to paddle with you. So we exchanged numbers. When I asked Pat at the end of our paddle yesterday, could I come back and take out the Zephyr on my own? And he says, no, you really need to be with an experienced paddler if you're going to go out. I was a little discouraged because I've been paddling on my own all along, and it is unsafe. The other thing I have to tell you is when I started paddling, the person that I paddled with didn't wear a life jacket, a PFD, personal flotation device. So I didn't. And when I went to paddle with this group, the woman who runs it is like, you need to put on a life jacket. You're not going out without one. So I had to take one of the rental ones, which are very poorly made and, bunched up around my ears. It was incredibly uncomfortable. I couldn't turn. And I went and bought a very nice PFD for myself. And when I was out with Brenda, she said, you never know if a boat is going to run into you. It's not that I'm unsafe, but you don't know what other people are going to do. And especially on the bay and in the summer, there are all kinds of inexperienced people that are out there doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and this idea of safety. On Saturdays, when we do this skill training, I've been in the water with my life jacket, helping other people or getting into my boat, but I've been standing on the bottom. When I was out with Pat yesterday, in order to do the heel hook to get back into your kayak, you lie flat on your back. That's the starting position to get into your kayak. I had never been in the water floating with my flotation device. It's not like you get one and you're like, let me try it in the water. So again, it was just a very interesting experience to see, well, what is it like? He laughed because he thought it was funny because I'd never tried it. But I was so grateful to go out with somebody that was experienced, where I could relax. I didn't have to be in charge. Just an amazing experience. My question to you is, Are there areas where you're wanting to grow and stretch? Are there areas or places where you've done something and it didn't work and you decided not to finish or follow through? And instead of saying, I rechose, you tell yourself you're a failure, you don't finish things, you don't complete things. Is it okay to just be where we're at? And I really had to do a lot of work the other day because I was just mentally really struggling and beating up on myself when I just felt really stuck. And I thought, is it okay today to just feel stuck, to not know, to feel frustrated, to feel like I had a plan that I wanted to go forward with and I couldn't, and now I don't know what to do and I'm feeling really overwhelmed? Can I just let that be okay? Because I really beat up on myself. I also beat up on myself because I want to be light and cheerful and positive and energetic. And the reality is that is not how I am every day. I do know what I need to do to get through the days, but not all my days are like that. And that's one of the reasons why I struggle with recording, that often I want to record, but by the afternoon, my energy is down. I'm tired. You'd hear it in my voice. This is where bringing in self-compassion and gentleness and trusting. And I think that when we get into these places where we're either beating up on ourselves or we're telling ourselves we don't finish things or we're losers or everybody else is living a great life and we're not, that if we can slow the process down and know that this may feel like it's permanent, this is just how it is for right now. And sometimes what's really helpful for me is to think about what has happened in the past. You know, when I was sharing in bonus episode 90 about not paddling on Wednesday, it happened this Wednesday. I didn't paddle in the morning. I was planning to go with this group of people Wednesday night, and then I got tired again and took a nap. And I started to beat myself up. But I thought, I've gone through periods in my life when I haven't exercised for weeks or months, and I come out on the other side of it. I have periods where I really struggle with food and snacking, and, you know, I'm anxious or I'm using food constantly for comfort, and it doesn't last for forever, and I come out of it and I come to a place of balance. That I think that when we have these very intense emotional states, whether it's fear or disappointment or worry, especially the not feeling good enough, man, that is such a big one for me. No matter what I do, I go through these periods where I just don't feel like I'm good enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not good enough. I'm pushing a lot of my growth edges right now, and I'll share more about this in some other episodes. But it's really bringing up this lack of confidence for me. I'm having a very hard time initiating projects. My son and his girlfriend came down a couple weeks ago, and we were going to do this Halloween craft. We didn't get all the supplies for it, and then I got them a couple weeks ago, and then I started to prep them, and they've been sitting on the dining room table, I don't know, for a week now, and I just cannot get myself to initiate it. And there is a part of me that beats up on myself that I really wish that I were able to initiate more projects and activities. And you know what? Right now, it's just not happening. How do we bring in that gentleness, that self-compassion, that acceptance? Because I guarantee you that if you get stuck in the beating up on yourself, that you will stay stuck. You will not move through it. And if you do, it will be much slower because we're hanging on to that resistance. And resistance is not a bad thing. But acknowledging that I'm resistant, I'm struggling, this feels like it's going to last for forever, I feel like a failure, but I know that that's not true. Being able to identify this is what's going on as opposed to being in it. So being in it is I'm a failure, I quit, I never get through things, I'm a loser. And the way that we make that shift is I'm feeling like I can't finish things. The message that I'm telling myself is I feel like I'm a loser. I feel like this is always going to be this way. That we create a little bit of distance, that creates some mindfulness, and it helps us to move through it. And then the other part is really using gentleness of, is it okay to just be here? What's the worst case scenario? And reminding ourselves that this is not permanent. It may feel permanent. It may feel devastating. Can I find a way to just be okay with this today? And what do I need to be gentle with myself and to be compassionate with myself? That trauma, there's something about really beating up on ourselves and staying identified in that very disempowered place. I remember being in therapy years ago and feeling like I was shadowboxing with myself. There was nobody there, but I was still kind of beating up on myself and just shadowboxing and being very defended all the time. Being defended is a form of self-protection. We had to do that to survive. So again, instead of getting angry that we're defensive, and I was just telling, I have a client who's a therapist, and I was telling her that I had a therapist when I was in my 30s who told me that I was very defended and I was very difficult to work with. That was not really helpful. She was in training, but that was a really unhelpful thing to tell me because I wasn't doing it on purpose. And what was the point of bringing it to my attention if you're not going to help me with it? And I remember getting a therapist later on and saying, I've been told that I'm very difficult to work with and I'm very defended. Y'all, that is so not the truth. We have these defense mechanisms because they kept us alive. They helped us to survive. And until we learn other ways to be in the world, we're going to keep doing what we learned to keep us alive and safe. Are there areas where you want to make some changes? And even if you're not ready, it's okay to go, this is what I want to do, and I'm not ready to do it. If you're beaten up on yourself, can you find some self-compassion? Can you find some gentleness? Can you trust? Our society is so about pushing through everything and think positive and have affirmations. And we have got to acknowledge the tough feelings and the things that we're struggling with. And at the same time, acknowledge what's working, what we have control over, and to figure out where we need to be in that balance. There are times when we just need to be in the feels, and there are times when we need to find a balance between the two so that we don't get stuck. I think that is all that I have to say about this. I have some other things I want to talk to you about, but I'm going to try and stay on one topic, at least for today. We'll see what happens in the other episodes. This is a really hard time in the world right now, politically, with having a pandemic. A lot of things are going on, and people are really struggling in their relationships, with work, with boundaries, perfectionism, people-pleasing, mindfulness, having gentleness and self-compassion. Relationships are a huge thing, and expectations in relationships. So if you're struggling with any of these things, not feeling good enough, oh man, that's such a big one for me, the not feeling good enough, feeling like you're too much or not enough. If any of those things resonate for you and you're wanting to work on them, I do have a couple of spots open in my practice right now. If you want more information, you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. Everything about my practice is there. I offer a free consultation. I work with people internationally. I'm doing more coaching than I am therapy right now. Coaching is really the modality that I prefer to use. It allows me to just be more interactive and to be there with you, and y'all know about what goes on with me, so the relationship is very different than some relationships that you might have with a therapist. I'm seeing more and more therapists really showing up authentically and wanting to have these really deep relationships with clients that are boundaried and healthy, but it's very different from that blank slate therapist. So how does that make you feel? I hope y'all are doing well as we move into the fall. It's really nice being back. I'm going to do my best to release weekly. It just doesn't always work. And I want to have room, and I am going to start writing a book pretty soon. And once I get into that process in a couple of weeks, I'm just not sure what things are going to look like for me, but I'm going to do my best to show up for y'all and try and go back to releasing on Tuesdays. If I'm very erratic, what I may end up doing is just release when I release so that you get an episode. If you do want to sign up for my newsletter, I'm going to try and send out a newsletter when I release an episode. And again, if you go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com, there's a banner on every page that says sign up for the newsletter. And right now the newsletters are pretty short. Hey, just released an episode. I hope y'all are doing very well. I am happy to be back. I think about y'all often and very grateful for each and every one of you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.